At 35,000 feet in the air in the comfort of first class, a simple tray of food nearly became a weapon. Jamal Thornton, a black tech billionaire known for his sharp intellect and meticulous standards, requested a nut-free meal, something that had been confirmed, triple-checked, and documented by his assistant, his physician, and the airline itself. But when the food arrived, it carried a silent killer, honey-glazed almonds, tucked beneath the wrapping like a trap waiting to spring. 10 minutes later, Jamal was clawing at his throat, gasping for air, collapsing in the aisle, while passengers either froze or filmed. A stranger saved his life. But Jamal didn't scream. He didn't sue. Instead, he activated a quiet surgical strike that would bring an entire airline and an entire industry to its knees. This wasn't just about allergies. It was about a system that cut corners, gambled with lives, and assumed powerful black men would stay quiet. Jamal didn't. He didn't just survive the flight, he redefined what accountability meant in the skies. Before we dive into this story of survival, reckoning, and quiet domination, tell us where you were watching from and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of power reshaped. The Sterling Sky Airways first-class lounge was a fortress of luxury, polished oak floors, leather recliners, discreet jazz. To any outsider, it was a sanctuary for the elite. But to Jamal Thornton, it was a battlefield disguised in velvet. At only 34, he wasn't just the youngest black CEO in tech, he was one of the most powerful people in global innovation. Still, experience had taught him power didn't stop prejudice. It just made the disrespect quieter, more strategic, more dangerous. Jamal stepped through the lounge in a tailored charcoal blazer, his cufflinks clicking softly like a metronome of control. He was not just traveling, he was managing risk. Behind his calm demeanor was a checklist that never left his mind: triple confirmation of his nut-free, dairy-free, gluten-free meal flight number, SK72, Seat 2A, in the name of the head purser. These weren't obsessive details. They were survival. His assistant Calvin had confirmed everything with military precision: emails, phone calls, even a direct line to the catering supervisor. Jamal's health history wasn't a secret to his team. It was a legal liability he had to navigate like a minefield. One wrong ingredient and his throat could close. One missed detail and he could die in silence. And yet when the boarding call came, a sliver of unease slipped into his gut. At the jet bridge, Jamal noticed something. A catering cart tipped sideways. A tray dropped and hastily shoved back in, workers in reflective vests moving too quickly. He clocked it all but said nothing. He wasn't paranoid, he was prepared. Still, it gnawed at him. Stepping onto the aircraft, he was greeted with the usual polished performance. "Good evening, Mr. Thornton," said a young flight attendant named Curtis. Smiles, eye contact, polite gestures. Everything scripted. Jamal gave a nod and moved to his seat, 2A, partitioned from the rest of the cabin by dark walnut panels and brushed metal trim. Curtis followed behind, beaming. "We have your dietary tray ready for after takeoff. Verified, allergen-free." Jamal paused. "You double-checked?" Curtis nodded. "Of course. It's from the premium stack." Triple flagged. A part of Jamal wanted to believe him. The other part, the one that had learned to survive corporate boardrooms backhanded, compliments and misfiled ER reports, remained on edge. But he nodded, sat down, and buckled in. The plane taxied, the engines purred, the lights dimmed, everything appeared perfect. But beneath that perfection, something was already unraveling. In the galley, two catering workers argued over the manifest. "Where's the 2A tray?" one asked. "Didn't come with the load," the other said. "Used a backup from the fridge. Said gluten-free, dairy-free. Should be fine." A tray was slid onto the cart. No one noticed the sealed cup of trail mix underneath a mix that included honey-glazed almonds. Back in 2A, Jamal reclined in his seat, eyes closed, letting the hum of the engines lull him. He didn't know that the cart rolling down the aisle held more than a meal. It held negligence wrapped in professionalism, and it was heading straight for him. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin buzzed with a soft rhythm of wine glasses, muffled conversations, and the occasional clink of cutlery. Curtis appeared with the tray polished and confident. "Special dietary request," he said, placing it in front of Jamal. Jamal scanned it. Chicken wrap, steamed vegetables, a sealed container of trail mix. His eyes narrowed. "Is this nut-free?" Curtis didn't miss a beat. "Yes, sir." "Verified by catering and me personally." "You're safe." Jamal paused. It was all their labels, seals, packaging. He unwrapped the sandwich, took a bite. dry but edible. He sipped water, let his shoulders relax. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then it began slow, quiet, invisible. A scratch in his throat, a warmth creeping upward, an itch behind his tongue. Jamal blinked, sat up straighter. He pressed the call button. Nothing. Pressed it again. Silence. His breath caught. Panic crept in. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His throat tightened. His chest heaved. He stood, stumbled, hands gripping the seat divider. The world tilted. His body betrayed him. Eyes blurred, mouth open, gasping. Passengers looked up, confused. Concerned, one man stood. "Hey, are you okay?" Jamal tried to answer. Only a wheeze escaped. He collapsed to one knee. A medic appeared, seat 3C. Fast, calm, commanding. "Where's the emergency kit?" he barked. Curtis froze. The room shrank. Lights dimmed. Every breath was a war. The EpiPen clicked. Relief at last burst through his veins like electricity. Jamal survived, but something deeper had snapped. Not just his trust, but his silence. He didn't scream. He calculated. They had nearly killed him. Now he would make sure they remembered. Jamal sat in the seat 2A, his pulse slowing but mind racing. The oxygen mask clung to his face, hissing softly. The medic Bryant knelt beside him, fingers on his wrist, counting heartbeats, as if he could steady time itself. Around them, the first-class cabin had dissolved into whispered horror. Passengers watched, unsure if they were witnesses or voyeurs. Curtis, the attendant who had served him, hovered pale and speechless. His once confident grin now replaced by the realization that he had become the face of a disaster. But Jamal wasn't thinking about Curtis anymore. He was replaying every step, every protocol that had supposedly protected him and failed. His eyes locked onto the tray, now sealed inside a biohazard bag. A clear container trail mix, still half-full almonds glinting innocently in the light. He didn't need lab tests. He didn't need a forensic team. The truth was already written in the label that shouldn't have existed. The ingredients list clearly stated peanut oil. His assistant Calvin had confirmed his dietary request 3 times. The manifest was triple flagged, and still somehow this had reached him. He had trusted the system and it nearly killed him. That betrayal was worse than the allergic reaction. Because it told him something chilling, someone had decided he didn't matter enough to double-check. The captain appeared moments later, offering apologies in a rehearsed, solemn tone. Jamal listened silently, then raised a hand to stop him. He didn't want words. He wanted answers. "Get me the manifest," Jamal rasped behind the mask. Curtis stammered. A junior attendant rushed off. A minute later, the evidence was placed in Jamal's lap. He peeled it open with trembling hands and scanned the document. Printed instructions: no nuts, no gluten, no dairy. The system had the right data. The paper trail was clean. But then he turned over the actual label from the tray, and there it was. Peanut oil, circled, in red ink, a manual override, a handwritten correction. Someone had knowingly retagged the tray. This wasn't a technological glitch. It was a human shortcut. Jamal leaned back, his face unreadable. He felt no need to yell. The label said it all. "This isn't a mistake," he whispered. "This is negligence." Curtis tried to apologize again, but Jamal's cold stare cut through him. "You gambled with my life to save time or avoid paperwork," he said. "You thought I wouldn't notice." But Jamal always noticed. That was how he built Thornton Global, a billion-dollar tech empire that didn't just disrupt it, rewired entire industries. And now, as the adrenaline ebbed, he began to rewire something else, the structure that allowed this near-death to happen. He didn't want a lawsuit. He wanted control. 12 hours later, Jamal stood before a floor-to-ceiling window in Geneva's Ilaria Grand Hotel, arms crossed, staring out at a skyline etched in steel and frost. Behind him, his suite buzzed with activity. Calvin hunched over a table stacked with catering manifests, FAA guidelines, chain of custody reports. The storm had followed them across the Atlantic, but Jamal had arrived with a plan. "I want leverage," he said. Calvin nodded. "We've traced the catering trail. There's a mismatch in the chain. The substitution on your tray has no paper record." "Of course it doesn't," Jamal replied. "It was done off protocol. Quiet, hidden. And now so are we." He pulled out his laptop and loaded a shareholder dashboard. Sterling Sky Airways, publicly traded, 5 top institutional holders. One of them, Pricewell Equity, was already teetering on the edge of divesting. They're vulnerable, Jamal muttered, showing Calvin a graph. Someone's consolidating. Quiet buys over the last week. Probably to fend off volatility. Calvin frowned. What are you planning? Jamal picked up the phone. Within the next 30 minutes, he had purchased enough shares through silent partners to cross the 10% ownership threshold. It wasn't a press stunt, it was structural dominance. I don't want headlines, Jamal said as he signed the final deal. I want to sit at their board table before they even realize I've walked in the door. That night in the sterile glow of the Geneva suite, Calvin asked the question that was forming in everyone's mind. What now? You bought a seat at their table. What's next? Jamal's reply was quiet firm. Next, I make sure they remember the price of ignoring someone like me. Not just in dollars, in culture, in policy. In every single tray they dare to serve. He opened a secure file phase 2, operational reversal. A list of safety auditors, public regulators, and whistleblower contacts glowed on the screen. This wasn't retaliation. This was revolution. Because Jamal Thornton didn't survive that flight to sue, he survived to transform. The boardroom at Sterling Sky Airways headquarters was a sanctuary of status-polished walnut glass partitions and an uninterrupted skyline view. But that morning, the illusion of calm was shattered. Phones buzzed. Emails flashed urgent subject lines. Executives huddled behind closed doors. An emergency shareholder meeting had been triggered by a man no one saw coming. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, David Kessler, CFO of Sterling Sky, sat frozen as the large display on the wall flickered to life. A quiet hush settled as a single figure appeared on screen, seated composed not at the head of a boardroom table, but in a minimalist office with the Geneva skyline behind him. Good morning, Jamal Thornton said, voice calm, eyes sharp. You may not know me personally, but I now hold 14.7% of your company. The silence hit like a lightning strike. David's lips parted, but no words came. Jamal waited, letting the magnitude settle. He didn't need to raise his voice. He owned the moment. He had walked through fire and come out colder, smarter, more dangerous. Yesterday, Jamal continued, your airline nearly killed me. Not by intention, but by negligence. Today I sit here not for revenge, but for realignment. He held up a copy of the shareholder charter. Clause 7.4 grants me the right to call an emergency vote on leadership and safety protocol reform. That's what we're doing here. Whispers rippled through the board. Some scrambled through their tablets to verify Jamal's claim. Others looked to David, who remained locked in disbelief. One board member, Harrington, a former aviation regulator turned investor, leaned forward. Mr. Thornton, he said carefully, are you implying criminal wrongdoing? Jamal didn't blink. I'm stating factual negligence. Your system's mislabeled an allergen-free meal. I have the tray, the label, and the medical report from the paramedic who saved my life. And now he clicked sharing the evidence folder live on screen. You do too. The documents appeared in sequence, flight manifests, chain of custody logs, a blown-up photo of the tray's label. The word peanut oil circled in red. This is more than a system failure, Jamal said. It's a culture failure. A culture that values appearance over accuracy. And I don't need a courtroom to fix it. David finally found his voice. We have channels for these complaints, formal reviews, audits. This isn't how it's done. This, Jamal said evenly, is how it gets done when you ignore formal warnings. A few members looked down, guilty or maybe complicit. Jamal continued. This meeting has one purpose, to initiate structural reform. Not a settlement, not an apology, a recalibration of how your company protects lives. He paused, then delivered the line that would become quoted for years. You built your systems on shortcuts. I'm here to rebuild them with standards. Across the room, Glazer, the aging director of operations, scoffed. You're exploiting a personal incident for corporate leverage. No, Jamal replied, leaning forward. I'm converting personal trauma into systemic change. There's a difference. Another board member, younger and less jaded, spoke next. What exactly are you proposing? Jamal tapped a button. A new slide appeared. The Thornton Passenger Safety Initiative, a $500 million trust. Independent. With full access to Sterling, Sky Catering contracts, audit chains, and compliance protocols. Glazer shook his head. And you'd control the trust. Jamal's voice was colder now. No, the survivors do, the people affected by negligence. The allergic child, the mother flying alone, the elderly man who doesn't speak English but trusts your label. He let the silence hang, then continued. This trust will report to its own board. Not your PR team, not your legal department. Real people. Real oversight. And if you don't agree to fund and integrate it, I'll initiate a leadership vote and make it public. David stood again. This is extortion. Jamal smiled faintly. This is ethics. Harrington tapped his pen. And if we agree, what do we get? Jamal's tone shifted. This was the pivot. You get the credibility of being first. The benchmark. The airline that didn't get dragged, one that volunteered to lead. You'll gain 3 new revenue streams through cross-industry licensing of the Thornton Standard. I've already secured interest from Sky Republic and Airfront. A hush spread across the room. You've already approached competitors? David asked, stunned. I don't wait for change. I create it, Jamal answered. The timer on the screen began counting down. The board had 5 minutes to vote. David glanced around the room. Faces once dismissive were now uncertain, calculating. The votes came in. 8 hands rose, then 10, then 12. Motion passed. The vote was official. Jamal sat back in his chair, face unreadable, as the screen faded to a confirmation message. Reform protocol approved. He had just triggered the largest aviation safety overhaul in decades, not through scandal, but strategy. He didn't threaten the airline. He infiltrated it, and the world hadn't even seen the full storm yet. When the emergency shareholder vote ended, the boardroom at Sterling Sky sat in stunned silence. Even the ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to hush, as if the building itself recognized that history had just shifted. For years, leadership at the airline had dismissed warning signs, pushed past protocol breaches, and assumed that mistakes could be papered over with PR. But not this time. Not with Jamal Thornton in the room, even virtually. After the vote, the directors dispersed slowly, each cloaked in their own quiet calculations. But across the company, something else had been set in motion, something more subtle, yet just as powerful. Inside a second-floor operations hub hidden behind the glass and chrome exterior of Sterling Sky's Chicago headquarters, a small group of mid-level staff huddled in a break room. Their eyes were glued to a live stream replay of the shareholder meeting. Most of them had never seen a CEO dismantle a board's authority that cleanly. Some whispered in awe. Others sat quietly, their faces pale. Among them was Dana Alvarez, a food safety specialist who had spent the past year raising red flags about mislabeled allergens and ignored complaints. Every time she filed a report, it was marked low priority. She'd nearly quit twice. But now, watching Jamal's words echo through the live stream archive. You built your systems on shortcuts. I'm here to rebuild them with standards. Something inside her shifted. She wasn't alone. Within hours, internal messaging channels across Sterling Sky lit up. Quiet messages passed between compliance officers, legal assistants, and training supervisors. People who had once been too afraid to speak up now forwarded meal incident logs, flagged unusual purchasing patterns, and reopened closed cases. Jamal's victory didn't just change the leadership structure, it rewired the silence beneath it. That same day, Dana sent a secured message to a new inbox created by the Thornton Passenger Safety Initiative. The subject line, non-compliance records, flagged and ignored. The body of her message contained dates, photos, and audit notes. Attached was a spreadsheet titled Meals Served Under Disputed Allergen Certification, 2023. She signed her name and added one line. For every tray we ignored, I hope this helps make it right. By noon, over 20 similar emails arrived. In a separate office in Geneva, Calvin watched the submissions pour into the trust portal. His eyes scanned each document with urgency, but also awe. They're waking up, he said aloud. Jamal, seated across the room, didn't look up from his tablet. They were always awake, he replied. They just needed someone to remind them they weren't crazy. Not long after, a surprising knock came at the door of the Geneva suite. A courier handed Calvin a thick envelope with no return address. Inside were printed pages, hand-annotated with yellow highlighter. It was a catering log from a major meal vendor. On the back was a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. They told us to save costs by reusing premium trays. Said no one would check. I wanted to speak up. I didn't. Please use this. MM. Whoever they were had just opened a new crack in the facade of quiet corruption. Jamal read every page carefully. He held the paper like it was evidence in a trial he intended to win. "We're not dealing with isolated mistakes," he said. "We're dealing with a culture that taught people to ignore red flags." Across the Atlantic in the Sterling Sky Legal Department, internal tensions mounted. Mid-tier managers began to panic. Rumors of resignations surfaced. Files previously buried in outdated archives were suddenly requested. HR sent out a company-wide memo. All documentation related to meal safety or allergen management must be preserved for review under new compliance mandates. It was damage control. But it was too late. The whistleblowers were no longer hiding. Dana Alvarez gave her first anonymous interview to a trade safety blog. She didn't name names, but she made one message clear. "I don't work for Sterling Sky. I work for the passengers who trust that tray won't kill them." The story went viral in niche aviation circles, then jumped to major news outlets. CNN, Bloomberg, and The Guardian all ran variations of the headline, "Insiders Speak Out, Airline Safety Culture Under Scrutiny," after near-fatal flight. Back in Geneva, Calvin turned the screen to Jamal. "You've started something they can't put back in the box." Jamal's expression didn't shift. "Good," he said. "Now we gather everything." They weren't just collecting mistakes, they were collecting momentum. The kind of momentum that moved regulators. The kind that forced audits. The kind that emboldened the quiet few to finally raise their voices. And among those voices, one stood out. It was a flight attendant from a regional carrier writing from a private email server. The message was short: "I wasn't on your flight, but I served a mislabeled tray last year. The passenger ended up in the ER. I never filed a report. They told me not to. If you're building something better, I want in." Jamal didn't reply with thanks. He replied with access. Within a week of Jamal's confrontation with Sterling Sky's leadership, the movement had evolved into a quiet operation spanning 3 continents. No press conferences, no viral hashtags, just encrypted inboxes, hidden documents, and an ever-growing network of insiders ready to unearth the truth. Jamal didn't need headlines. He needed proof. And now the proof was coming to him. Calvin sat in a darkened operations room inside the Geneva suite, 3 screens in front of him, each streaming data from different sources. On one monitor, a directory of flagged incidents from airline partners. On another, timestamped chat logs between catering supervisors and procurement heads. On the third, heat maps showing flight paths of contaminated meal deliveries over the past 12 months. "This isn't negligence," Calvin said, eyes fixed on the scroll of receipts and digital signatures. "It's orchestration." Jamal, seated beside him with a stylus in hand, drew a line between 2 vendors that had appeared in 5 different incident reports. "We trace the routes, the names, the substitutions. We don't move until we know how far this thing really goes." The digital dossier had already exceeded 300 pages. Each file was catalog labeled and cross-referenced. But what changed the game wasn't the number of incidents, it was the patterns they revealed. Entire catering companies were rerouting premium allergen-free orders to meet deadlines, swapping trays at the last minute, and falsifying confirmation logs with generic check marks. The tag said verified. The content said danger. Then came the breakthrough. An anonymous folder was uploaded to the initiative's portal. No sender, no subject line, inside a video. The timestamp showed it had been recorded inside the galley of a major airline's long-haul flight. A catering employee wearing gloves and a headset was seen hurriedly removing a sticker from one tray and slapping it onto another. Behind the camera, a voice whispered, "They said no one checks these tags." Well, Jamal Thornton just did. Calvin played the video on loop. Then he said, "We need more of this." So they launched a new layer of the initiative, Project Traylight, a secure Dropbox available to whistleblowers across the world. Flight attendants, ground crew, even junior auditors. Anyone with access to internal systems was given a digital dead drop to upload screenshots, emails, or media. Within 72 hours, over 700 megabytes of data flooded in. One log stood out: a series of internal Slack messages from a vendor director to his meal prep team. "Don't escalate the missing label, just sub in another nut-free sticker. We're behind schedule. He'll never notice. VIPs don't eat half the tray anyway." Attached were photos of the tray in question. It was nearly identical to Jamal's. Jamal stared at the screen. They knew. They always knew. But not everyone had been careless. A flight medic named Brielle, who had never met Jamal, sent in a 2-page PDF detailing a previous allergic reaction on a different airline. The passenger had nearly collapsed, just like Jamal, only there had been no EpiPen on board. The woman was saved only because another traveler happened to carry one. She survived, Brielle wrote, but it made me realize we have no unified protocol. Not really. I tried raising it, but they said it wasn't common enough to warrant a change. Jamal added the report to a new folder titled Policy Vacuum. They weren't just looking at Sterling Sky anymore. They were looking at the industry. Then the turning point came from inside one of the largest catering vendors, Global Serve. A mid-level logistics officer, codenamed Delta Echo, uploaded a complete backup of procurement requests from the past 6 months. But buried within the metadata of each file was a hidden note written like a diary entry. March 17th, we shorted 6 trays with allergen flags. I logged it. My manager told me to delete the tag and reprint a generic one. April 5th, passenger with severe shellfish allergy filed a complaint. We traced it back to a tray from the overflow fridge. That fridge isn't even certified. May 3rd, I'm tired of hiding this. Jamal read every line. Then he paused on the last sentence. If I disappear, know this wasn't random. Someone on the inside is trying to cover this up. It chilled the room. This is bigger than we thought, Calvin muttered. Jamal nodded, and deeper. They brought in forensic analysts, a legal firm specializing in whistleblower protections, a logistics auditor who once worked for the Department of Transportation. Within days, they confirmed a disturbing reality: multiple meal vendors had been operating under minimal regulation, with little to no cross-verification. They reported compliance to airlines that never checked. The FAA overworked, airline compliance teams undertrained, and the cost-saving astronomical. Jamal stood at the center of it all, not just as a victim anymore, but as a system architect. His vision wasn't about revenge, it was about architecture. So he drafted a new document, a blueprint titled The Thornton Protocol Meal Chain of Custody Compliance and Accountability for All Airborne Services. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. Within it were 5 pillars. 1. Triple verification of dietary tags with blockchain timestamping. 2. Mandatory photographic logging at every transfer point. 3. FAA integrated allergy audit reporting. 4. Legal liability for mislabeling. 5. Passenger access to digital meal records pre-boarding. Jamal sent it to the CEOs of the top 10 airlines worldwide. He added one line: "This is not a proposal. It's a firewall. Sign it or face the reckoning." The world didn't shake when Jamal Thornton hit send. But inside boardrooms, compliance offices, and PR departments across the global aviation sector, something cracked. The Thornton Protocol wasn't just radical, it was radioactive. It forced leaders to choose act now or be held accountable when the inevitable happened again. 3 days after sending the document, Jamal received his first official response. It came not from an airline, but from a coalition of catering vendors. The letter was brief, polite, hollow. While we appreciate the spirit of your proposal, we must express concerns over operational feasibility, cost burden, and regulatory overreach. We invite further dialogue before any implementation steps are taken. Jamal stared at the digital letter with a calm that chilled Calvin. They want delay, he said. Delay is a strategy when your house is already burning. That same day, another letter arrived. This one was from the legal division of Sterling Sky Airways. It requested an immediate meeting to discuss the disruption caused by Jamal's disclosures. The subject line was worded carefully: strategic de-escalation discussion. Jamal didn't blink. Schedule it, he told Calvin, but not on their turf. The meeting was set for Friday inside a private arbitration suite at a Geneva law firm. The location was neutral, but the atmosphere was charged from the moment Jamal entered. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, no visible power symbols, but the room adjusted to his presence. Across the table sat 6 executives, 3 from Sterling Sky, 2 from Global Serve, and 1 legal advisor who had previously represented pharmaceutical companies in international negligence trials. Introductions were made, water was poured, then silence. It was the Sterling Sky COO who broke first. "Mr. Thornton," she began, "we believe your concerns were valid, deeply valid. But the way this has unfolded, public documents, whistleblowers, leaks, has created a climate of fear. It's destabilizing." Jamal didn't flinch. Good. Stability is what kept the rod hidden. The Global Serve representative shifted in his chair. What exactly do you want? A fund, a contract buyout, a public apology? Let's name it. You think this is about image? Jamal asked, voice low. I don't want a bandage. I want surgery. He pulled a folder from his leather satchel and slid it across the table. Inside, a timeline of every misstep, every falsified meal log, every name badge number, and Slack message. This is a system, he said, and you're part of it. What I want is the root cut out. One executive bristled. You're a tech CEO, not a regulator. Jamal smiled faintly. Then why are you all here? The tension in the room tightened like wire. Calvin stood silently in the back, his hand resting on a second briefcase. If the first folder didn't make them listen, the second one would bury them. The legal advisor tried a different approach. Mr. Thornton, we understand the trauma you experienced. And yes, the system failed you. But surely you can see that industry-wide reform takes time. A year, two. There are unions, contracts, global logistics. You had time, Jamal interrupted. Every flight where a child was handed the wrong meal, every passenger who gambled with a mislabeled tray, you had time. He leaned in the edge of steel, rising in his tone. But now I'm the clock. The room went silent again. Then Jamal made his final move. He tapped a tablet in front of him. A screen behind him came to life. A map appeared dotted with blinking red markers across Europe, Asia, and North America. Each of these represents an airline reviewing their vendor contracts as of this week, he said. Dozens of them have my documents. Some are now auditing meals tray by tray. He swiped again. New screen. This, he said, is a list of all shareholders of Global Serve who have received my dossier. Another swipe. And these photos loaded are 3 families who've contacted me since my report, each with a child hospitalized by mislabeled airline food. He let the images sit. The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. Finally, the Sterling Sky COO spoke again. You've made your point, Mr. Thornton. What does cooperation look like? Jamal closed the tablet, folded his hands. Cooperation starts with full public acknowledgement of your role, he said, and immediate adherence to the Thornton Protocol. The Global Serve rep interjected, That's not realistic. Jamal stared at him, then prepared to answer to regulators, investors, and the media. I won't stop. The room was still. The COO sighed. You'll get your protocol, but we want to review it through Joint Task Force oversight. Jamal nodded once. Oversight is welcome. But stall, lie, or fake implementation, and I'll make sure every document I'm holding ends up on every business journalist's desk by Monday. Calvin stepped forward, then placing the second briefcase on the table. No one opened it. They didn't need to. Jamal rose, adjusted his cuff once, and walked out. Outside, Geneva was cool and gray. A light mist fell from the sky. As they entered the car, Calvin asked, Do you think they'll comply? Jamal answered without looking up. They'll pretend first. Then they'll adapt. Because now they know someone's watching. By Monday morning, Jamal's threat was no longer just rhetoric, it was strategy in motion. Across aviation and food service circles, the term Thornton Protocol no longer sounded like a proposal. It sounded like a reckoning. Airline safety auditors, investor protection firms, and even international transport regulators had begun citing the phrase in their memos. Quietly but decisively, the dominoes were tipping. Inside Global Serve's headquarters in Frankfurt, panic masked itself as professionalism. Glass-walled conference rooms were filled with compliance officers poring over old shipment records, allergen logs, and trade checklists. Legal teams worked in overlapping shifts, trying to determine which of their own paper trails could become liabilities. The PR department, usually slow and pristine, turned into a war room. Get me all press mentions of Thornton Protocol, barked one director. Find out which board members have connections to Sterling Sky. We need leverage before the hearings begin. But no amount of leverage could undo the facts. Within the next 48 hours, 3 major airlines, Sky Republic Aerolinks and Solaris Air, announced they were suspending contracts with Global Serve pending internal audits. A 4th airline, Altus Pacific, went further. They terminated their deal outright and announced a public partnership with Thornton Global to pilot a new allergen tracking system. Sterling Sky tried to manage the optics. They issued a joint press release with Jamal's team announcing an industry-first transparency agreement and committed $20 million to overhaul catering systems. But the number was cosmetic. The real pressure came from within. That same week, Sterling Sky's internal compliance division leaked an email exchange between senior managers debating whether to downplay the incident until the press cycle moved on. Jamal didn't comment publicly. He didn't need to. The press handled it for him. Cover up at 35,000 feet. Financial Tribune, negligence or criminal conduct. FAI investigates airline food protocols. Global Business Today. The man who turned a tray of almonds into aviation's greatest reckoning. Magazine Jamal's face graced covers he'd once graced for innovation. Now he was there for accountability. But he wasn't celebrating. Because what he saw wasn't victory. It was collapse. Inside Thornton Global's Geneva office, Calvin's analytics team tracked every movement in the industry. 42% of vendors are already adjusting their labeling software, he reported during one evening briefing. 9 airlines have requested direct integration with our allergen scanning interface. 2 are asking if we'd consider certifying their training programs under the Thornton protocol. Jamal nodded but remained still. And Global Serve, they're bleeding, Calvin said. 2 investor groups have pulled out. Their COO just stepped down citing health reasons. And he hesitated. Jamal turned. What they've initiated quiet layoffs. Over 100 workers from their regional prep kitchens in Munich, Atlanta, and Dubai are being terminated. No notice, no severance. Jamal's jaw tightened. They're offloading guilt onto the lowest rungs. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. The skyline was luminous with winter light, but his mind moved beyond it. They built this system on shortcuts. Now they'll use human lives as the firebrake. Calvin stepped forward. Do we respond? Jamal turned slowly. We don't respond, we protect. And with that, a new phase began. Within 24 hours, Thornton Global set up an anonymous relief fund for food service workers displaced by negligence-related terminations. It was funded not by Jamal's company, but by a portion of the $500 million Safety Initiative Trust redirected with one board vote, quietly, cleanly, effectively. Each worker received a packet severance job referrals, retraining stipends, and access to an ethics hotline where they could anonymously report previous negligence without fear of retaliation. Calvin called it the second chance firewall. Jamal called it justice. Meanwhile, Global Serve's legal arm panicked. They attempted to file a restraining order against the fund citing business interference and defamation of operation. The motion was denied in court. The judge's remarks were simple. Providing relief to harmed individuals is not defamation. It is dignity. The quote went viral. More employees came forward. A whistleblower from Sky Catering Logistics, a subsidiary under Global Serve, released an internal document outlining how expired premium meals were relabeled, with new stickers in violation of food safety laws. The practice had been ongoing for 3 years. Jamal's legal team didn't even have to dig for more. They were being handed the shovels. By Thursday, Jamal was scheduled to testify before the International Council for Aviation Ethics in Brussels. It wasn't a hearing. It was a reckoning broadcast live in 4 languages. Dressed in a dark navy suit with no tie, Jamal took his seat at the hearing table and adjusted the mic. I am not here today to speak as a victim, he began. I am here to show you a map of the rot. And he did. For the next 3 hours, he outlined names, dates, processes, and failures. He named no individual for shame, but he named every protocol that failed. He offered not blame, but blueprints. By the end of the testimony, the council didn't vote on a sanction. They voted on an adoption. Unanimously, they moved to initiate industry-wide allergen safety regulation guidelines based on Thornton Protocol standards. The room didn't erupt in applause. It sat still, silent. But in that stillness, something irreversible had happened. A system had collapsed, and something new was beginning. The days that followed were unlike anything the aviation industry had seen in decades. Not since the overhaul of security protocols post 9/11 had there been such unified momentum for reform, and this time it wasn't driven by government mandates. It was driven by a man who had choked on a meal tray labeled safe. The world watched as the Thornton Protocol moved from private standard to public benchmark. Within 2 weeks, 7 major international airlines publicly adopted its certification process. News outlets dubbed it the new gold standard for airline safety. Airline training centers that once ignored food handling courses now offered full-day simulations with allergen scenario drills. Old guard executives, many of whom had downplayed the incident as an unfortunate error, were quietly reassigned, retired early, or dismissed under strategic restructuring. And yet amidst the chaos, Jamal Thornton remained calm. Not detached, not disinterested, calm with purpose. He spent his mornings in Geneva and his evenings on secure conference calls with regulators, engineers, and survivors of in-flight allergy incidents. Survivors like the mother of a 6-year-old boy who had once gone into anaphylactic shock mid-flight and never received an apology from the airline. Now she sat across from Jamal as part of a new advisory board under the Thornton Trust, helping design real-world scenarios for flight staff training. "This should have been in place years ago," she said, voice trembling. "But thank you for not letting it stay broken." Jamal didn't smile. He just nodded and quietly added her son's story to a growing internal database. Case file 0083, unreported child incident, verified witness testimony. Meanwhile, at Sterling Sky's tech wing, Calvin oversaw the rollout of a real-time meal tracking platform. Staff nicknamed it TrayTrack. Every tray from source to seat would now be QR-coded, time-stamped, ingredient scanned, and signed off by no less than 3 checkpoints. But the transformation wasn't just digital. Inside flight crew lounges, conversations shifted. Veteran attendants who once scoffed at passenger allergies now reviewed laminated allergen charts between flights. Internal Slack channels previously flooded with jokes and memes now held threads like unexpected EpiPen deployment, debrief, learnings, and tray anomaly escalation. What I missed. The culture was changing, not from the top down, but from the trauma out. And still there were those who resisted. In New York, a board member from a rival airline published an op-ed calling the Thornton Protocol performative vigilance, and a billionaire's overreaction weaponized as corporate policy. The article went viral for all the wrong reasons. Within hours, readers unearthed documents showing that same board member had once voted against implementing food labeling software due to budget priorities. He was forced to resign by morning. The message was clear. You could no longer protect profit over people and expect silence in return. Back in Geneva, Jamal took a rare morning off. He walked through the Thornton Institute for Aviation Safety, pausing in a hallway lined with photos of recovered passengers. Some were children, some elderly. One frame simply showed a handwritten note, "I lived. Thank you." He paused, staring at it. His chest rose slowly. "Mr. Thornton," a soft voice broke the silence. He turned to see a young intern, probably no more than 23, holding a clipboard and a nervous smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you need to see. It's not public yet." She led him into a quiet room where a private monitor played a surveillance video captured inside a prep kitchen in Jakarta, Indonesia. The footage showed a catering manager removing a nut-free label and replacing it with a generic one before shipping the meal off to a major airline. Jamal's face didn't flinch. He simply asked, "Date yesterday," she said. "But we caught it because of the vendor flagging system you added last week." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Jamal nodded. "Send it to the Trust's legal and enforcement branch. Draft a suspension of vendor certification pending investigation, and inform the airline CEO directly. No PR, just facts." "Yes, sir." As she left, Jamal sat alone. And for the first time in weeks, he let himself feel the full gravity of what they were building. This wasn't just policy reform. This was an immune system, one that could now identify, isolate, and respond to systemic failures before they became fatal. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Calvin walked in a moment later. The first certified flights using the new protocol took off this morning. No incidents reported, and Deshawn's crew passed the surprise inspection with flying colors. Jamal gave a rare smile. That kid saved a man's life before he even had to. Calvin grinned. That kid's on track to be VP of onboard safety by 30 if we're not careful. The two men shared a quiet moment. Then Jamal stood, reached for his coat, and headed toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Calvin asked. "Brussels," Jamal replied. "The Ethics Council wants help drafting the new global charter." He paused at the door. "It's time we stop reacting to tragedy. It's time we start anticipating it." And with that, he left. A man once choked by a systems failure, now rebuilding it, one protocol, one tray, one promise at a time. The office hallway outside the Thornton Institute's West Wing was unusually quiet, save for the soft hum of servers running diagnostics in a nearby control room. The new allergen chain of custody system had just gone live across 4 partner airlines. Jamal Thornton stood before a large digital board reviewing live data streams as his eyes tracked each tray number, origin, kitchen, label scan, and in-flight confirmation in real time. Behind him, Calvin entered with a tablet in hand and a conflicted expression on his face. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Jamal turned slowly. He'd learned over the past few months that problems weren't always disruptions. Sometimes they were invitations to see more clearly. Calvin handed him the tablet. On screen was an internal report from Horizon Gate's logistics department, one of the new airline partners who had adopted Thornton protocols. The report showed an anomalous scan on tray 54672. A label had been manually replaced after it had passed the triple checkpoint. The tray had already been boarded. Jamal's jaw tightened. "Was it caught?" barely, Calvin said. "A crew member flagged the inconsistency mid-flight. No one was harmed. But it slipped through our system." The first failure. Jamal absorbed the data, quietly scrolling through timestamps, personnel tags, and scanner logs. The infraction wasn't random. It was intentional. A technician had bypassed the secure scan under a supervisor's login. The motive wasn't clear yet, but the message was someone inside the system had tried to test the limits. "This is retaliation," Jamal murmured, more to himself than to Calvin. "You think it's from Global Serve?" Calvin asked. "Possibly," Jamal said. "Or someone with a similar agenda. People who built their careers on speed and shortcuts won't just vanish. They'll adapt. They'll find cracks." He moved to the wall monitor and pulled up the full report feed across all 4 participating airlines. His fingers hovered for a moment, then tapped into the staff credential database. "We find the source," he said. "Not just the technician, but the authorization layer that let it happen." Calvin leaned forward. "You want to start with internal discipline or vendor audits?" "Neither," Jamal replied. "We start with the training logs. Anyone who missed a protocol cue will get retrained. But if this was deliberate, we escalated it quietly." Outside, a light snow began to fall across the Geneva skyline, flurries, spiraling against the darkened windows of the Institute. Inside, the glow of the wall monitors lit up a sea of data points, each one representing a passenger whose life depended on precision. This wasn't a clean-cut victory, Jamal realized. It never would be. There would always be another error waiting to be made, another cost-saving decision disguised as efficiency. But what had changed, what couldn't be undone, was the expectation. The world now expected accountability. The next time someone asked, "Does it really matter if we double-check this label?" the answer wouldn't come from a manager. It would come from a system engineered by someone who nearly died for that question. Calvin looked up from his screen. "Should we notify Horizon's executive team?" "Not yet," Jamal said. "We tighten our protocol first. Then we show them where they're vulnerable." Quietly. He moved toward the exit coat draped over his arm, then paused at the door. "We're not building a perfect system," he said without turning back. "We're building one that knows how to repair itself when it's attacked." And with that, he disappeared into the hallway while the system pulsed on, alive, adaptive, and watching. 3 days later, the internal investigation revealed exactly what Jamal suspected, and more. The Horizon Gate incident wasn't an isolated lapse. It was part of a coordinated effort involving 3 contracted logistics employees who had previously worked for Global Serve. Jamal and Calvin sat side by side in a secure room inside the Institute's operations center, watching the recorded testimony of one of the accused, a shift supervisor named Elena Moretti. "I didn't think it was dangerous," she said on the screen, her voice trembling. "We used to override labels all the time to keep things moving. I didn't know Thornton's system tracked label metadata." That sentence hung in the room like smoke. Calvin exhaled. "They're not just resisting, they're importing the old culture." Jamal nodded, then pulled up the risk map on the wall screen. Red dots flared around a cluster of third-party prep stations across Europe. The system had flagged inconsistencies, delayed scans, mismatched manifests, altered timestamps. Most hadn't led to any service disruption, but they had tried. Jamal stepped forward and dragged a box over the cluster. "Lock them out. You want to sever all Horizon Gate's European prep vendors?" Calvin asked. "Yes, effective immediately," Jamal replied. "Replace with certified vendors only. Issue a silent stop order. No press, no headlines." His voice was calm but final. The difference now wasn't just oversight, it was velocity. Within hours, food service logistics rerouted new contracts, activated and unvetted vendors were removed from the system entirely. By morning, the updated food prep map displayed a clean green status across all flagged sectors. But the deeper problem remained. This isn't just sabotage, Calvin said. It's culture clash. The people who failed upward in the old system don't know how to operate in this one. Jamal nodded. They'll try to bury accountability under speed. But this system was built to catch the cover-ups. He turned back to the feed of training modules being deployed across new airline partners. The latest update included real-time compliance tracking, ethics review scenarios, and anonymous reporting tools. It wasn't just a safety system anymore. It was an ecosystem built to expose negligence before harm occurred. That afternoon, Jamal convened a private call with Horizon Gate's executive team. The video call screen lit up with 6 faces: the CEO, COO, 2 VPs, and legal counsel. "I'm not here to shame your airline," Jamal began, tone neutral. "I'm here to show you how close you came to disaster and why we acted without your permission." He shared his screen. The redacted report of the falsified tray, the audit trail, the employee logs. The Horizon Gate CEO frowned as the evidence rolled in. By the time Jamal displayed the video testimony from Elena, the room was silent. Going forward, Jamal said, "Your access to our systems will be conditional. Certification will be reevaluated quarterly. And Thornton Oversight will have direct authority over meal integrity across all your international routes." The COO cleared his throat. "That sounds more like takeover than partnership." Jamal didn't blink. "Call it what you want. Your passengers won't care what you call it, only that they don't die from a meal." There was a long pause. Then the CEO nodded slowly. "Understood." When the call ended, Calvin looked over. "You think they'll fight it?" Jamal shook his head. "They can't afford to. Their insurance rates just tripled after our audit flagged negligence. They're not worried about control. They're worried about liability." Later that night, as the Geneva Institute's lights dimmed and the security sweep completed its rounds, Jamal stood alone at the top floor watching planes blink silently in the distance. This war wasn't about shouting louder. It was about forcing systems to listen, and he was just getting started. At 6:17 a.m., a silent alarm triggered in the monitoring system inside the Thornton Institute's Geneva Operations Hub. It wasn't a fire, a break-in, or even a cyber attack. It was subtler, an automated warning of metadata inconsistency in an outgoing food manifest filed from a supposedly clean vendor in Singapore. By 6:22 a.m., Calvin and the night shift team were reviewing the discrepancy. By 6:30, the kitchen in Singapore had been contacted directly. The vendor denied any wrongdoing. At 6:43 a.m., the server logs showed otherwise. One tray had been swapped after initial tagging. A meal originally marked dairy-free had been quietly replaced with another from a neighboring rack, identical in packaging, but different in composition. And that replacement tray, if not caught, would have been placed in front of a 7-year-old with a severe lactose intolerance flying with his parents to Tokyo. At 7:00 a.m., Jamal was awake and reading the report on his tablet, standing barefoot in his sweet steam, rising from a cup of black tea beside him. He didn't react visibly, just nodded once, turned on the secure terminal, and called an emergency strategy meeting. "Who's the vendor?" he asked without preamble. Calvin replied, "Cura Catering Southeast Asia, recently acquired by Global Serve Holdings under a subsidiary named Cambridge Logistics Group." Jamal didn't respond at first. His silence wasn't uncertainty, it was strategy sharpening itself. "They're laundering operations through shell vendors," he finally said. "They're betting we can't trace the ownership." "We traced it," Calvin replied. "And there's more. Cambridge Logistics just signed agreements with 3 other international carriers last month. That puts potentially contaminated meals on up to 140 flights a week." Jamal closed his eyes for a moment. Then it's time to escalate. By 8:00 a.m., a conference line had been established with 3 new allies, the CEOs of Airfront, Sky Republic, and Horizon Gate, whom had already signed on to the Thornton Standard. Each had skin in the game now, and each had quietly begun replacing internal food safety systems with Thornton-certified tech and compliance modules. "We have a breach," Jamal told them. "Covert re-entry by Global Serve assets under shell names. We're pulling the thread on their entire regional network." "Do we go public?" one asked. "No," Jamal said flatly. "We go coordinated." Over the next 6 hours, his team launched what they called Operation Overhaul. Each vendor tied to Cambridge Logistics was placed under temporary audit lockdown. Tray-level scans were reanalyzed, and bulk packaging, timestamps, reverse engineered, and training logs of each prep employee reviewed. The data revealed a clear pattern. Employees had been instructed to use generic labels instead of allergen-specific seals for efficiency. A company-wide memo uncovered by Jamal's legal team urged staff to prioritize throughput over bureaucratic delay, a euphemism for cutting corners. By 3 p.m., Jamal had compiled a dossier of violations flagged under international aviation safety standards and cross-referenced with allergic incident statistics from the past year. One slide was particularly damning, a world map showing red lines from every documented mishap tied to mislabeled meals, all traced back to shell firms under Global Serve's influence. At 4:12 p.m., Jamal stood before the assembled leadership teams of the Allied Airlines via a secure video call. "You have a choice," he said. "Either we clean this up together or we become the next case study in systemic failure." He offered them a pathway forward. Each airline would co-sponsor the creation of an independent oversight board, a cross-industry panel with enforcement powers chaired by third-party auditors, but funded through the Thornton Trust. It would mean relinquishing some control, but the reward was total transparency, and passengers would know. At first, the resistance was palpable. No airline wanted to be seen as weak. No executive wanted headlines linking their brand to contaminated meals. But Jamal didn't negotiate from panic. He negotiated from inevitability. "I'm not offering you protection," he said. "I'm offering you the chance to lead." The silence that followed was heavy. Then came the first voice. "Agreed." Then another. "Yes." By the time the call ended, every airline had signed on. That evening, Jamal walked alone through the Institute's courtyard. The air was crisp. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the scent of frost hung in the wind. From a small security booth, a junior technician named Lana looked up as he passed. "Sir," she said nervously, "that alert this morning, if you hadn't acted when you did." He stopped and turned. The child would have made it on the flight he finished for her. She nodded, eyes wide. Jamal gave a small nod. "That's why we don't miss alerts. Not one." He walked on his silhouette framed by the courtyard lights. The war was expanding, but so was the reach of his systems. And for every lie Global Serve tried to disguise with new packaging, Jamal had a new layer of accountability ready to tear it down. This wasn't about meals anymore. It was about reckoning. By the following morning, headlines across 5 countries had shifted tone. What once were vague reports of passenger discomfort or food inconsistencies had been refiled as systemic negligence under international review. The term Thornton standard breach had entered circulation among aviation analysts, regulators, and insurers. Inside the Thornton Institute's Geneva Command Center, a digital map glowed across the central screen, color-coded by airline region and supplier. Red zones marked ongoing investigations. Green indicated full compliance. Yellow was for active transition airlines that had signed on to Thornton protocols but hadn't fully implemented them. But it wasn't the map that commanded attention that morning. It was a message, encrypted, anonymous. It arrived at 9:14 a.m., flagged by the internal compliance AI, before Calvin even saw it. The subject line was chilling: "Before another child dies." Inside a single attachment, a spreadsheet, dozens of flights, dozens of mislabeled trays, a pattern. Every single one traced back to a vendor operating out of South America, Lunapac Foods, a company that had until recently been listed as an unaffiliated distributor. Jamal stared at the name. "Cross-check Lunapac against Cambridge Logistics and Global Serve shell vendors," he ordered calmly. 5 minutes later, the results came back. Lunapac was not unaffiliated. It had been acquired by a Panamanian trust, one that was indirectly owned by Redlock Holdings, a known proxy of Global Serve. The pattern was no longer regional. It was global. They were re-entering the system through every forgotten corner of the supply chain. Africa, South America, the Middle East regions, where oversight was weakest, where contracts were cheap, inspection loopholes wide, and enforcement often depended on political will. "They're building a new shadow network," Calvin said grimly. "They know you're watching the front door, so now they're using the back alleys." Jamal didn't flinch. He pressed a button on the table, activating a secure briefing with 2 trusted allies, Dr. Sanjay Patel, head of the International Aviation Medical Board, and Emily Rhodes, a former FAA regulator turned whistleblower who now advised the Thornton Trust. "What you're about to see," Jamal said, "is a map of the next global failure. Within minutes, the trio was deep in strategic discussion. Jamal proposed the creation of Project ExoChain, an international coalition that would track every vendor tray, ingredient, and staff member involved in airline food prep. The goal to make every step of the process traceable, time-stamped, and verified from source to seat. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. It's ambitious, but if we link it with a medical risk database flag known allergens and medical histories, you could predict, even prevent the next incident in real time. Emily added, if we frame this right, not as a regulatory burden, but as a safety net for families, pilots, diplomats, and executives, you won't just get compliance. You'll get momentum. Jamal's gaze hardened. Then we build it. Not tomorrow. Today. By noon, the first servers for ExoChain were being installed across 7 countries. Jamal's tech teams worked in parallel time zones, coding, translating, linking supplier invoices, with flight manifests integrating wearable medical ID compatibility for passengers with critical allergies. Meanwhile, back in Geneva, the legal division of the Thornton Institute submitted a confidential memo to the UN International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, requesting an emergency review of cross-border catering safety laws. The memo was backed not just by evidence, but by partners, 7 major airlines who had now pledged full transparency under the new protocol. And still, the opposition wasn't silent. By 3:45 p.m., Global Serve issued its most aggressive response yet, a lawsuit filed simultaneously in 3 jurisdictions alleging defamation, commercial sabotage, and unauthorized use of proprietary tracking standards. The language was sharp, corporate, but beneath the surface it reeked of desperation. Calvin stormed into Jamal's office with the papers. They're coming for your standards now, he said, tossing the files onto the desk. They want the court to block ExoChain entirely. Jamal opened the folder slowly. Inside were exhibits from Global Serve's legal team attempting to frame ExoChain as invasive, privacy-breaching, and unauthorized surveillance technology. He scanned the pages without blinking, then spoke quietly. Then we release our own exhibit. An hour later, the Thornton Institute made public for the first time the full audio recording from a whistleblower working inside Cambridge Logistics. In the clip, a senior procurement manager laughed about gambling on allergy labels and banking on no lawsuits. The public reaction was immediate and seismic. On social media, the hashtags "not just tray food" and "every meal matters" began trending globally. Parents posted photos of their children with allergies thanking Jamal. Flight crews began leaking internal memos showing their own fears about mislabeled meals they had been forced to serve. The pressure mounted, and yet Jamal never raised his voice, never called a press conference. He let the data do the shouting. That night, as the Geneva skyline glowed gold under a winter moon, Jamal stood alone on the balcony of his penthouse. Below, a quiet hum of purpose filled the city. Inside, Calvin approached with one final update. 2 more airlines want in, he said. 1 from Brazil, 1 from the Gulf. Jamal nodded, not surprised. They finally believe the fire's real. Calvin looked at him for a moment, then asked, and what if they try something bigger? What if they go after you personally? Jamal turned his voice steady. Then we widened the map, because this wasn't a battle for a safer sandwich. It was a war for the standard of care itself. And Jamal Thornton had just redrawn the borders. 4 days later, in an unexpected move, the European Aviation Authority, EAA, summoned an emergency summit in Brussels. The reason a leaked internal report from Sterling Sky's former legal team, now circulating among regulators, proved that multiple allergic incidents previously dismissed as passenger sensitivity had direct ties to the same global supply chain that nearly ended Jamal Thornton's life. That report, anonymous in origin but undeniably real, listed 48 separate flights across 11 airlines each, with documented evidence of mislabeling, cross-contamination, or protocol failure. The most damning detail: each of these incidents had been internally marked as resolved without passenger notification or correction to the wider system. As the world digested the numbers, the EAA declared a continent-wide audit of airline food safety. Back in Geneva, inside the newly fortified Thornton Institute Situation Room, Calvin watched the press conference unfold with a grim sort of satisfaction. They're scrambling now, he said, flipping to a live feed of protesters outside Global Serve's Berlin office. Even the unions are turning. Jamal stood nearby, not watching the screens, but studying a digital dashboard projected across the wall. The map was no longer red, green, and yellow. It was alive with pulse points, live data streams, and alert systems flagging supplier inconsistencies in real time. ExoChain had gone from prototype to operational in less than 96 hours. Calvin turned. So what now? They're bleeding. We've got the public, we've got the regulators, we've got the tech. Do we go for full industry buyout? Jamal didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to a steel cabinet in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside was a stack of printed contracts, vendor agreements, licensing offers, NDAs, and audit waivers, each signed by a different major airline, each agreeing to Thornton oversight in exchange for immunity from upcoming investigations. I don't need to buy the industry, Jamal finally said. They've already handed it over. But not all resistance had crumbled. At 3:17 p.m., a courier delivered a confidential letter to the Thornton Institute. It came not from an airline or caterer, but from a coalition of private equity firms, many of whom held large stakes in Global Serve and its network of shell vendors. The letter was simple, a warning. Back down or we pull every dollar from your allies. Calvin read the letter face pale. This is coordinated. If they divest from your partner airlines, it'll cause stock collapses. Panic. The shareholders will walk away from us. Jamal didn't answer right away. Instead, he scrolled to an encrypted folder on his terminal and opened a file labeled Directive Cascade Response. Inside were contingency plans, not threats, blueprints. Trigger Cascade Beta, Jamal said. Only the first phase, Calvin hesitated. That leaks the chain of shareholder proxies tied to Global Serve's silent partners. Exactly. An hour later, across a dozen financial news outlets, investigative pieces appeared in synchrony. Each traced the same web of investments from Global Serve through a lattice of holding companies' trusts and silent capital injections right back to the very firms who had threatened Jamal just hours earlier. The effect was instantaneous. Within 12 hours, one of the largest firms, Terra Glen Capital, issued a public statement. We were unaware of these practices. We are launching a third-party audit and suspending all investments tied to in-flight food services. 3 more followed. By morning, the coalition had fractured. Inside the Thornton Institute's press room, Calvin stared at the wall of headlines. You didn't just survive the attack, he said, shaking his head. You redirected it. Jamal didn't smile. They thought I was alone. Later that day, Jamal received a private video call from Sarah Lee, CEO of Skylink International, the largest trans-Pacific carrier and one of the few holdouts yet to sign on to ExoChain. Her face filled the screen, unreadable at first. Mr. Thornton and I resisted your protocols not out of doubt but fear. I thought this was a fire that would pass. And now, Jamal asked. She hesitated. Now I see it's a system collapsing, and I want in. Jamal nodded slowly. Then you agree to full transparency. No middle vendors, no legacy waivers. We track everything. From ground to gate, agreed, she said. The contract was signed an hour later. With Skylink on board, ExoChain controlled food safety logistics for 72% of all international flights from the G20 nations. That night, Jamal stood alone in the Institute's observatory wing, watching the data streams update in real time. Each flicker represented a secured tray, a verified route, a life potentially protected. But he knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because somewhere in a shadowed office in Singapore, a new memo was being drafted. A rebranding plan. A way for Global Serve to shed its skin and rise again with a different name, a different shell, a different path. Jamal knew this, and he was ready. Because this time the system didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to the people who refused to be ignored. The memo from Singapore surfaced 3 days later, not through official channels, but via a digital backdoor that Jamal's cybersecurity team had quietly embedded months prior. The sender was a consultant firm known for corporate cleanups, reputation laundering specialists who helped scandal-ridden companies change names, logos, and websites while bearing public accountability beneath legal redirects and trademark filings. The plan was bold rebrand Global Serve as Altura Foods International, transfer key assets through a Dubai-based shell firm, and relaunch under a new tagline, Global Taste, Local Trust. The logo, a stylized blue leaf, clean, harmless, innocuous, and completely detached from the legacy of negligence and near-fatal mistakes that had brought them here. Jamal read the memo from his hotel in Tokyo where he was meeting with Japanese aviation officials on expanding exochain protocols. As he scrolled past the diagrams and talking points, his face remained still, but inside he felt a cold certainty settle. They're trying to erase the stain, Calvin said, pacing nearby. And worse, they're betting the public won't connect the dots. Jamal turned his laptop toward him. Then let's make sure the dots are too loud to ignore. They activated Protocol Umbra, a pre-written media cascade that traced every name change address, shift, and trademark transfer tied to global serve over the past decade. They linked subsidiaries to prior violations, cross-referenced offshore transactions, and uploaded it all into a real-time data visualizer, accessible to journalists, regulators, and partner airlines. Within hours, the graphic went viral under a simple headline, "A new logo can't hide a rotting core." Altura's rebranding attempt collapsed in under 48 hours. But Jamal wasn't celebrating, because what followed was worse. A group of disgruntled former executives, many ousted from Sterling Sky, began funding a smear campaign against the Thornton Institute. Fake social media accounts, shadow press briefings, a botnet that spread disinformation about Jamal's real motives, accusing him of monopolizing aviation food safety for profit and threatening small vendors worldwide. It gained traction, enough that 3 smaller airlines paused their exochain rollout. Inside the Institute's communications war room, Calvin slammed a tablet onto the desk. "They're painting you as a tech tyrant. The same guy who saved lives is now being called a monopolist by anonymous bloggers with fake followers." Jamal remained calm. "Good. Let them speak." Calvin blinked. "Good." Jamal turned the monitor to display a new dashboard, ExoChain Sentinel, a network of whistleblower submissions from flight crews, kitchen staff, and operations managers. All anonymous, all real, all citing recent attempts by third-party vendors to bribe, bully, or bypass safety systems. "They're reacting because they're exposed," Jamal said. "Now we go deeper." He approved the Sentinel Expansion Initiative, an encrypted platform where any employee in the airline or catering industry could anonymously upload safety violations backed by blockchain-stamped logs to preserve authenticity. Within a week, they had over 1,200 submissions, some minor, others devastating. One report came from a kitchen worker in Madrid who admitted that a supervisor had ordered food trays relabeled to meet deadlines even after a potential allergen was identified. Another came from a cabin crew in Sao Paulo who had been told to stop being dramatic when she flagged mislabeled vegan meals containing dairy. The evidence mounted, and Jamal did what he always did. He tracked it, mapped it, exposed it. This time not to the media, but to governments. At the next International Flight Safety Consortium Summit, Jamal stood before delegates from 39 nations. The venue, a sleek auditorium in The Hague. The crowd, regulators, airline CEOs, consumer safety leaders. Jamal didn't bring a slideshow, just a small USB drive. He inserted it into the console. The screen behind him lit up with an interactive map, a living mosaic of the aviation food industry's blind spots. Red zones marked confirmed violations. Yellow zones indicated open investigations. Green meant ExoChain certified. He turned to the crowd. "This isn't about one man, one company, or one mistake," he said. "It's about a global supply system that was never designed to protect human life, only to manage liability." Silence. Then a single clap. Then a wave of applause. After the summit, 4 additional countries signed memoranda endorsing ExoChain protocols. Airlines in India, South Africa, Norway, and Chile joined within the next month. The tide had turned, but the war wasn't over. In a backroom meeting in New York, a group of industry lobbyists convened to propose a regulatory countermeasure, a bill that would classify third-party safety tracking systems as competitive interference unless overseen by a neutral aviation board. In other words, outlaw ExoChain. Jamal received the internal memo 2 days later, forwarded from an anonymous congressional aide. Calvin read it aloud in disbelief. "They're trying to shut us down with legislation." Jamal stood by the window, eyes on the skyline. "Then we go public before they do." He drafted a short op-ed, published it in 5 major outlets. It read, "Systems don't fail because of human error. They fail because humans are taught that shortcuts are normal. I didn't create ExoChain to profit. I built it so no child, no parent, no elder ever boards a flight thinking a menu is more dangerous than the sky." And if that scares you, you are never fit to lead. The next morning, the proposed bill was withdrawn, not because of outrage, but because 6 members of Congress had just received ExoChain's full whistleblower dossier packaged in sealed briefcases and hand-delivered by former aviation inspectors who now served on Jamal's advisory board. He hadn't just built a tool, he'd built a movement, and the air once filled with silent danger now carried something new: accountability. The wind bit at the windows of Jamal Thornton's Manhattan office as he stood alone watching a cargo plane lift into the winter sky. Inside, the lighting was soft, deliberate, the kind chosen not for luxury, but for clarity. The world below moved on taxis darting through slush, people wrapped in scarves, hurrying to appointments. But up here, the air felt still. Not peaceful, strategic. Calvin entered with quiet urgency, a folder in hand. The EU Commission just launched an inquiry. Jamal turned, brow raised. On what grounds consumer discrimination, Calvin replied. Based on food safety, inequality between economy and first class. Jamal took the file, flipped it open, and scanned the first few lines. It was true. In many carriers, even ones that had adopted ExoChain first-class passengers, received allergy-verified meals, while economy still relied on generic disclaimers. The discrepancy had triggered complaints across multiple nations, with parents citing fear, confusion, and inconsistent practices as grounds for legal action. Jamal didn't flinch. This is what we needed, Calvin blinked, a discrimination probe. A spotlight, Jamal clarified, big enough to force alignment. They moved quickly. That afternoon, Jamal convened a closed-door session with ExoChain's legal and analytics teams. Charts were drawn, timelines adjusted. A new initiative was born: Equity Flight Protocols, a system ensuring that dietary safety standards would now be uniform across all cabin classes without exception. But rollout would not be simple. Some airlines pushed back, citing cost. Others claimed logistics. One executive emailed Calvin directly, "We're not feeding royalty back there. They can bring their own trail mix." That line didn't sit well. Jamal had it printed and framed, hung on the wall of ExoChain's Berlin office under the heading, "Why We Fight." Weeks passed. Tensions escalated. But Jamal refused to retreat. He scheduled meetings with EU regulators, citing the precedent of medical equality standards in public health. He proposed a shared funding model for implementation. Slowly, resistance began to crack. Then came an unexpected ally. A former flight attendant from a Scandinavian airline released a detailed memoir describing systemic neglect of food safety in long-haul flights, especially for passengers from marginalized backgrounds. The chapter, titled "Cheap Lives and Cheaper Meals," went viral. Jamal's team reached out, quietly supported the woman's legal defense when her former employer tried to silence her. Within days, ExoChain's public approval surged, and so did the stakes. In boardrooms from Atlanta to Abu Dhabi, Jamal's name became a litmus test. To some, he was a reformer. To others, a disruptor. But no one denied he was forcing the aviation industry into a reckoning. Meanwhile, Calvin uncovered something darker. He entered Jamal's office one evening, his face pale. "I think I found it." Found what, Jamal asked. Calvin slid a document across the desk, an internal memo from one of the world's largest airline lobbying groups. The file outlined a containment strategy. Their goal: undermine ExoChain through media proxies, legal bottlenecks, and if needed, political blacklisting. They even planned to file complaints against Jamal, personally framing him as a monopolist, undermining industry competition. Jamal didn't even blink. "Then it's time we show them this is bigger than me." He drafted a plan to decentralize ExoChain's core architecture, open source the non-proprietary safety protocols, share the tech with regulators, build training academies in 3 continents, funded by the trust but run by third parties. In essence, Jamal began to make himself obsolete, because true systemic change isn't about control, it's about resilience. At a global aviation conference in Dubai, Jamal gave what many would call his most important speech. He didn't name names, he didn't accuse or attack. He simply projected one slide behind him, a picture of a passenger meal tray. 2 versions, identical in appearance, one safe, one fatal. No passenger should ever have to guess which one they're holding, he said. The crowd didn't applaud, they just stood. And that silence, that weight, meant more than cheers. Back in New York, Jamal returned to his office late that night. Snow fell in slow spirals outside. Calvin sat nearby, watching the world map on their screen glow in increasing green. More airlines, more governments, more compliance, and then a quiet moment. You ever think Calvin said slowly about that day on the plane? How close it really was? Jamal didn't answer immediately. He just stared out into the snow. I think about it every day, he said at last. But not because of the fear, because of the opportunity it gave me to fix what should have never been broken. Calvin leaned back. And when it's all fixed, Jamal smiled faintly. Then we build the next firewall, wherever it's needed. Outside, a plane cut across the night sky. And the quiet war for safety continued, tray by tray, policy by policy, country by country. The following week, Jamal arrived in Tokyo under a cloud of conflicting expectations. The press was watching. Global Serve Catering had just been suspended from 3 additional carriers, and rumors had started swirling about a potential criminal probe in 2 jurisdictions. The ExoChain protocols were now referenced in regulatory discussions as the Thornton Standard, not just a program, but a benchmark. And the Japanese Ministry of Transport had requested a closed-door consultation. Jamal didn't travel alone. With him were Calvin, 3 legal advisors, and a quiet woman named Dr. Ayaka Fujimoto, an allergen safety expert who had once written a thesis on systemic food labeling fraud. Jamal had read it 5 years ago. Now she was the architect of their Asia-Pacific framework. As they walked into the ministry building, local press lined the steps, their cameras flashing in a flurry of controlled curiosity. Jamal didn't stop for questions. His mind was already 4 steps ahead. Inside the building, the meeting room was minimalist white walls, wood panels, and a single lacquered table. 5 senior officials sat waiting. At their center was Vice Minister Hiroshi Takeda, known for his cautious but sharp administrative approach. Takeda bowed slightly. Mr. Thornton, we have reviewed your dossier. It is troubling. Jamal bowed in return. It should be. Takeda gestured for everyone to sit. You are not the first to raise concerns, but you are the first to come with data verifiable, time-stamped, and legally notarized. That creates problems for us. Political ones. I understand, Jamal said. But I didn't come here to embarrass your regulators. I came to help you preempt something worse, public loss of confidence. Takeda nodded slowly. Go on. Jamal opened his briefcase and retrieved a slim binder. Inside was a summary of ExoChain's latest audit results from 5 regional airports, including Osaka and Narita. It showed disturbing patterns, mislabeling rates in economy meals, inconsistent allergen training, and failure to isolate trays in transit kitchens. Dr. Fujimoto leaned forward. These numbers are not random. They match global trends. The problem isn't your laws, it's your enforcement pipeline. It's not built for automation era volume. Takeda flipped the pages, his eyes narrowed. Calvin added quietly, we're not here to sell anything. We're here to license it. Publicly. No strings, no equity clauses. We're willing to provide the training and software if the ministry certifies the protocols as the new national standard. It was a gamble, one that had taken months to prepare. Takeda looked at Jamal. You're saying Japan can use your system? For free, Jamal met his gaze. I'm saying Japan can lead this region in food safety reform. If we do it here, others will follow. The silence that followed was long and heavy. When Takeda finally spoke, his words were measured. Give me 1 week, and tell your team to prepare for formal review. If your system is as robust as you claim, we will back it. After the meeting, Jamal and his team walked through Ueno Park. The air was crisp with the scent of winter blossoms. Calvin spoke first. That went better than I thought. It's not done, Jamal said. This is the most delicate phase, the part where political pride collides with public good. Calvin nodded. You think they'll sign? Jamal looked at the sky. They have to, because the next mistake will be public. And this time there will be no deniability. That night, an email arrived in Calvin's inbox. It was from an anonymous employee at a major airline alliance. The subject line, proof of systemic contamination. Attached were documents, internal memos, temperature logs, override approvals. One file stood out, a catering manager's handwritten note that read, "We've had 3 near misses this month. Don't escalate unless someone dies." Jamal read the line twice. Then he closed his laptop. In Tokyo, a storm was building. Not of weather, but of reckoning. And for the first time in months, Jamal felt a strange calm, because now the truth wasn't just his. It was spreading. Quietly. Powerfully. And soon it would belong to everyone. 3 days after the Tokyo meeting, the media storm began. It didn't start in Japan or the United States. It began in Sydney, where a single passenger on a regional flight had gone into anaphylactic shock after eating what was labeled as a nut-free chicken salad. The man survived barely, but someone on board had recognized the tray's brand. It was Global Serve. By noon, Jamal's team had the incident log cross-referenced and linked to 3 identical supplier routes. By the following morning, flight food fail was trending across Asia-Pacific. Sterling Sky's board, once hesitant, now energized, called an emergency meeting, not out of fear, but to ask a single question. Can we lead the industry response? Jamal didn't reply with a press release. He replied with a blueprint. Inside a confidential suite of the Hyatt in downtown Singapore, Jamal convened what Calvin called the Midnight Summit. Around a private table sat representatives from 6 airlines, 3 of them competitors. There were no cameras, no name tags, just minds, records, and truth. "We don't have months," Jamal began. "We have days, maybe less. The Sydney incident is just the opening tremor." An executive from Pacific Ridge Airways leaned in. "Why should we follow your protocol? What makes you different?" Jamal didn't blink. "Because while your PR team was preparing statements, mine was training airport kitchens. While you argued over legal exposure, I built a system that logs contamination in real time. And while you filed insurance paperwork, I was rewriting global aviation safety." He slid a slim device onto the table, ExoScan, a compact scanner capable of checking molecular allergens on tray surfaces. Licensed, patented, and quietly tested across 3 airlines already. "I'm not here to compete with you," he continued. "I'm here to build the standard you'll all eventually need. The only question is whether your airline will be a follower or a founder." No one spoke, but one by one, eyes moved from Jamal to the scanner, then to each other. By the end of the summit, 4 of the 6 agreed to join. The other 2 asked for time. Jamal gave them 48 hours. Back in Geneva, the Thornton Institute was humming. Dr. Ayaka Fujimoto had been flown in permanently. A new cohort of trainers had arrived, former medics, chefs, and even whistleblowers. The curriculum now included emergency response, supply chain ethics, and digital tracking. Calvin was overseeing the expansion into digital certification. "We have the model," he said, pointing at a blueprint. "Now we brand it," Jamal nodded, "but not like a product, like a promise." Together, they finalized the seal, certified by Thornton Standard, verified, tracked, trusted. By the end of the week, Jamal's phone buzzed again. This time it was the European Aviation Safety Agency. They wanted to convene. And for the first time in its history, the World Health Organization reached out not just to audit, but to collaborate. Not everyone was thrilled. Behind closed doors, executives from Global Serve met in panic. Their legal team had drafted an embargo threat. Their PR firm proposed a counter-narrative, paint Jamal as a disruptor threatening global catering jobs. But the data was undeniable. And worse for them, new whistleblowers had emerged. One revealed a memo from 2 years ago: "Nut allergies are manageable. Liability is cheaper than reform." The memo leaked. Stocks plunged. Global Serve's CEO resigned within 48 hours. Jamal didn't celebrate. He didn't even comment. Instead, he flew to Zurich. Inside a private meeting with regulators, he made a quiet proposition: mandatory onboard scanner certification for all allergen-sensitive meals. The room hesitated, then agreed. Outside the building, Calvin waited by the car. "They approved it?" he asked. Jamal nodded. "That's EU, Asia. The US is next." Jamal turned to look at the snowy mountains. "Not the US," he said, "the FAA." Calvin paused. "You're going federal," Jamal replied without turning. "I'm going global." That night, in a quiet suite in Zurich, Jamal sat alone. On his tablet was a message from a mother in Kansas. "My son flew today for the first time in years. Nut allergy. He ate safely. Thank you." Jamal read it twice. Then he powered off the screen. It wasn't done, but it was working, and somewhere quietly a child slept peacefully at 35,000 feet because someone had refused to let a tray be good enough. 10 days later, a ripple spread across the aviation industry when the New York Times ran a front-page headline: "From tech CEO to global safety architect, Jamal Thornton's quiet takeover of airline accountability." The article dissected not just his reforms, but his methods. It described his silence as sharper than most CEOs' declarations, his strategies as more surgical than political, and his ability to trigger industry-wide shifts without ever holding a public office. Inside the Thornton Institute, the article sparked another wave of global inquiries. Airlines from Africa, South America, and the Middle East began requesting the Thornton standard for licensing. The system that had once been a response to negligence was now a sought-after brand of security. But Jamal didn't allow the Institute to grow bloated. He was methodical. Every partnership went through rigorous vetting. Every vendor endured background checks. Every protocol required simulation testing across multiple climates and flight durations. Back in Geneva, a high-security operations room was quietly launched Thornet, a real-time global database that logged allergen data across participating airlines with anonymized flight reports updated every 5 seconds. Calvin, now heading the new tech division, stood in front of the main screen, where blinking green dots tracked safe flights across the globe. "Only 2 red alerts today," he said, almost smiling. "Both flagged and intercepted before boarding." Jamal stood silently beside him, nodding. "Still too many." On another screen, a blinking notification appeared. Invitation World Aviation Policy Summit. Keynote speaker Jamal Thornton. Calvin tapped the screen. "It's official. They want you to set the standard." Jamal stared at the invite. "We're not done yet." He wasn't wrong. Across the Atlantic, in a high-rise office overlooking Chicago's skyline, former Sterling Sky board member Martin Glazer sat in a private meeting with investors. He was no longer on the board, but his influence lingered. His pitch was Direct Launch, a counter-consortium that offered flexible meal compliance without Thornton's rigidity. "What Jamal Thornton offers is a fortress," Glazer said. "We offer a market." The room nodded cautiously. Money still had its language. But one investor, silent until now, slid a folder across the table. Inside was a comparative audit. One chart in particular showed a 0.2% failure rate on flights using Thornton standard protocols versus 2.7% on legacy systems. The numbers were devastating. "Market doesn't matter," the investor said, voice calm. "Liability does." Glazer swallowed his rebuttal. Meanwhile, in London, Jamal met quietly with global insurance executives. He made one request: incentivize safety. Lower premiums only for certified flights. Penalize negligence. The insurers didn't even blink. They were already modeling it. Days later, Lloyd's of London released a press statement: new premium structures to support allergy-safe protocols, effective Q3. The shockwave wasn't media-wide, it was boardroom deep. By the following week, 4 airlines scrambled to book emergency consultations with the Thornton Institute. One CEO, who had previously dismissed Jamal's movement as reactionary overcorrection, now requested a private walkthrough of the Geneva Training Center. Jamal declined. "You don't get the tour," he wrote. "You get the application." At Sterling Sky, a quiet internal email circled an acknowledgement that Thornton's trust had not only become the regulatory North Star, but the ethical floor. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was the bar. Back in his Geneva office, Jamal sat across from Calvin, reviewing new data. "I want you to prepare something," he said. "Not just for airlines, for governments." Calvin blinked. "You're talking international law?" Jamal nodded. "I want our standards written into ICAO documentation. FAA, EASA, Transport Canada. If they fly above 10,000 feet, they fly with accountability." Calvin hesitated. "That's going to take more than strategy. That's lobbying." Jamal's gaze didn't waver. "Then we lobby, but not with favors, with facts." That evening, in a private room at the Thornton Institute, Jamal reviewed new footage, a surveillance video from a non-partner airline that had recently declined his protocol. The footage showed a tray being served, then panic, then a call for a doctor. The passenger survived. Barely. Jamal closed the laptop. He didn't slam it. He didn't curse. He just whispered, "We're not done." Outside, the snowfall returned, dusting Geneva's rooftops with white. But inside, the war against carelessness continued, not with fury, but with structure. A new update to Thornet went live that night. Automated flagging for unverified ingredient substitutions. No alerts yet, but Jamal knew it was coming, because negligence wasn't a glitch. It was an operating system, and he was rewriting it. The final report was ready. Inside a discreet, high-security conference center nestled in the Swiss Alps, leaders from 72 airlines, global food regulators, and health safety experts convened behind closed doors. They weren't here for a press stunt. They were here because they could no longer afford not to be. At the center of the room stood Jamal Thornton, no longer the billionaire tech disruptor in tailored silence, but the architect of a global standard. On the widescreen behind him was the final audit zero. 0% allergen incident rate over the past 12 months across every Thornton-compliant airline. No system in aviation had ever achieved that. And it hadn't come from lawsuits, government mandates, or fear. It came from one man who almost died and chose, instead of revenge, to build reform that could not be ignored. Jamal took a slow breath, stepped forward, and laid the final card on the table. "This is the future of food safety," he said. "Not a patch, not a fix. A complete rewiring of how we treat risk. It is scalable, ethical, and long overdue. But you don't need to adopt it to make headlines. You need to adopt it to keep people alive. No more rhetorical speeches, no applause, just an offer." He walked out as quietly as he had entered. A month later, the Thornton Standard was written into the ICAO's Global Aviation Codebook, and that many thought was the end of the story. But stories like this don't end with boardroom votes. They echo. Weeks later, a young catering trainee in Mumbai flagged a mislabeled tray before it was loaded onto a flight to Sydney. The internal report said Thornton Protocol caught it. No one made a press release. But a child on that flight got home safely that day because someone followed a system designed in the aftermath of a silent emergency. In Atlanta, a flight attendant recertified using the Thornton training modules noticed an allergic passenger sweating, visibly distressed, and calmly administered aid before symptoms escalated. The passenger didn't even know they were having a reaction. The crew did because the protocols had taught them what to see. And in Nairobi, a team of Thornton Institute graduates launched a local aviation safety NGO focused on translating food safety policy into multiple regional languages so nothing ever got lost in translation again. Jamal never asked for recognition. He never sat for interviews or signed endorsement deals. But the plaques started appearing anyway. One in Singapore's Changi terminal read, "Every tray, every time, because someone's life is on it." Another in JFK, "He didn't choose silence. He chose the system." And one in Geneva, inside the Thornton Institute lobby, engraved into stone, "You almost killed me. Now I protect millions." Late one night, Jamal stood alone in that lobby. The lights were dim, the halls quiet. A new class of trainees had just graduated that morning. Their voices still echoed faintly in the air. He ran his hand along the plaque's edge. He didn't feel anger anymore. He felt peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from revenge, but from responsibility fulfilled. He stepped outside into the snow. Across the street, a bakery worker waved someone who had once served airline meals herself and now taught safety logistics part-time at the Institute. Jamal waved back, not as a CEO, not as a survivor, but as a man who rewrote the rules without ever needing to raise his voice. This story wasn't about a tray of food. It was about how systems fail when no one is watching and how they evolve when just one person refuses to look away. It was about checklists that became lifelines, about pain that became protocol, and about a life nearly lost transformed into a standard no one could ignore. So the next time you hear someone say, "It's just a meal," remember, that's exactly what almost ended a life. And because someone paid attention, it never will again. Now it's your turn. Subscribe if you believe one mistake should never cost a life. Comment where you're watching from and tell us what kind of change would you fight for. And don't forget to hit the notification bell, because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're blueprints for a safer world. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next flight.